Hello and welcome back to The Dive, Season 2, Episode 26. I am Jat, joined by Kobe again and Azael.
Twice in a row.
Twice in a row we have Kobe
It's incredible.
before Freak comes back to the show permanently.
You're welcome.
Yeah. No. It is still good to have you back. We're, as we said, at the
okay.
end of the regular season. We had a tiebreaker day on Monday, which reseeded 3 through 6. You know what was interesting about that tiebreaker day, actually? Is that...
I know what you're going to say because I watched the analyst desk.
Okay.
I think.
What are you going to say?
I think you're going to say
What are you
that
gonna say?
it was like the essentially strength of wins.
Yeah.
That the teams ended 3 through 6. Like they ended the same standings that they would have if you just ranked them based off strength of wins.
That's exactly what happened.
There-
And even though the matchups were drawn randomly,
Knew it.
that is also now the playoff matchup. So
Yeah.
the first game of the tiebreaker is the first game of the playoffs.
So we accomplished nothing.
With the same seeding. Well, we affirmed the strength of the teams once again at the end of the
there were
tiebreaker
some
day.
fun games.
It made 100 Thieves third, Echo Fox fourth, TSM fifth, and FlyQuest sixth. And there's also a tweet coming into the Summer Split playoffs that the semifinal opponents are actually decided by Team Liquid after the quarterfinals happen. So depending on who wins the 3-6 or the 4-5 match, Team Liquid basically gets to pick who they want to play going into the semifinals. So the seeding
Yeah.
is not the dynamic reseeding we used to have. It's actually just picked seeding.
I actually really like that. I think it makes a lot of sense. You know, you guys talked about this again on the desk, I believe, but it's one of those situations where seeding doesn't always represent like your strength at the end of the season, right? You know, if Cloud9, hadn't actually gotten that bye, right, everyone would very clearly want to avoid them and things along those lines. So it'll be pretty interesting. But I do feel like looking at how the seeding actually ended out, it is probably fairly accurate to
Yep.
where I think teams would be chosen. You know, maybe someone would rather play. I could see a world in which someone would rather play like against 100 Thieves than Echo Fox, though, because maybe you think, oh, well, Echo Fox is more unpredictable or something. Like for drafting purposes, I could see some changes there.
Yeah, definitely agree. And 100 Thieves, you can always be like, okay, well, we're going to have the early game, so we're going to devise this plan around what we've seen from them over and over. But generally, I definitely agree.
Yeah, the end of the regular season also marks the check-in period for our pre-summer split power rankings that we did 9 weeks ago. I've actually gone through and ranked who would win based off.
Decided who would win.
If you remember last split in the spring, we tracked it in two different ways. It was either just like how many total numbers were you off? So
Yeah.
if you predicted someone to be first and they were third, you'd be 2 off. But then there was also this thing, the fancy name called root squared analysis, which basically just squares whatever number you are off. So if you're off by 4, that's actually 16 points, and that's bad. So it overly punishes you for missing by a lot.
Yeah.
So I ran the numbers,
Okay.
and
I already know.
Azael is victorious. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Last place in spring, first place in summer.
Yeah. But to be fair, I was last place by like 1 place or something. We were all pretty close. We were all pretty close in the spring. So despite the fact that I'm clearly
I was the
superior-
winner, though, so that's
Despite
what
the fact that
matters.
I'm clearly superior than you all,
It
it's
actually
probably not
wasn't
that
even
bad.
that close this time. So
Oh, see,
based on
great.
the normal ones, Kobe and I were tied at 20 off.
Okay.
And Azael was only 13 off.
Ooh,
So
that's looking good.
Your biggest miss was actually C9, who you predicted 5th, and they ended up finishing 2nd. But you
Okay.
predicted TL first, Golden Guardians last. Your Echo Fox and 100 Thieves were
I remember
only
I had
one off.
FlyQuest higher than you guys, which probably
You
helped
had
me too.
FlyQuest at 8th.
You
Kobe
probably
and I
had
both
Optic
FlyQuest 10.
higher than
Yeah.
us, too. Optic and FlyQuest, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I remember thinking about FlyQuest. Like I thought they had more of an upside because of the crazy meta stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting.
And I think
Yeah.
I had Golden Guardians higher than both of you, so that screwed me.
Yeah, and then when you go into the root squared, you also win by more just because
Ooh, that feels good.
because the biggest one you're off was by 3, and Kobe and I both were off by 4 on FlyQuest. I was off by 4 on TSM, so I was 56, Kobe was 50, and you were 25.
Ooh, twice as good.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
nice. So
Also-
I'm gonna add that to another line. Of my
I wish I
resume.
had the trophy from spring to
Yeah, you
give it to
could-
you now. We
Yeah.
have a coronation. You are now the
You're
champion.
the crown.
He is the champion of that prediction. However, you did lose the C9 will make playoffs bet.
Hey, and that's the one we bet on.
Yeah, and that's like the more important thing. I feel like we will pay that out next week when
Yeah.
Cloud9 is about to play their triumphant appearance with a playoff bye. It's like a super loss. They
Yeah.
didn't only get
The
playoffs.
super loss.
You
Playoff
guys
bye.
never actually determined the bet, though. Like, what was it for? What
Yeah.
are the terms?
So we found a cloud suit on Amazon, and Azael's going to wear that next episode. It just hasn't arrived yet, so we're
Yeah.
going to do it next week.
Wait, I thought we decided that was a reward. Like,
Well,
that suit
I know.
is cool
Well, I
looking.
think it's a cool suit, but the fact that Azael will now have to become the Cloud9 superfan, I feel like that is fine. Like the person who.
I feel like you guys are doing your bets all wrong.
We could also both wear. We could order two, right? There's like Prime shipping.
You win and you
Then
lose. It's the same.
what? Dude, is this a participation trophy?
I'm fine with this.
You win,
I'm
you
fine
lose,
with
the
it.
same thing happens?
See, your bet
we'll
was
figure
way
it out.
more extreme, and
Basically, we
You guys are a
decided
couple of clowns.
we could get Cloud9 like clown soups. I don't know.
it's hard to find a good cloud-related costume. We were looking.
Yeah, just the Cloud9 Academy set. Just bring that in. It's-
Yeah, we should get that.
Oh man. So that's it for the power rankings. There was obviously a pretty crazy season. I think FlyQuest was one of the biggest surprises. One of the things that I do want to touch on that is a quick correction is we had mentioned during the analyst desk and a lot in the last few weeks that there had never been a 9-9 team to miss playoffs in an 18-game split. That is not technically correct. Team 8 in the spring of 2015 was 9-9, but they got to play a tiebreaker and then they lost.
Oh,
you
so they
could
were
count
technically
that
9
as
and 10.
a postseason, and then they ended 9-10. But the regular season ending was 9-9.
Yeah.
This is the first time a 9-9 team didn't even get a tiebreaker
Mm-hmm.
with Optic. So wanted to make that correction. Feels real bad for Optic as well if they didn't get that tiebreaker, but that's just how it falls. And they need one more win throughout the rest of the regular season.
And they can also, kind of blame some of the teams at the bottom because we have a couple of the bottom feeder teams who are losing so much. We like when you have like some very weak teams at the bottom, then it makes it possible for them to miss out, right? Normally you have I find 8, 9, 10 is not usually all this clumped up that far down. So that kind of screwed Optic a little bit. If they took another win here or there, Optic could be right in that playoff picture. And it's definitely very disappointing for them. Like they were so excited. I think they were riding high off of their win, but that's tough.
Now they got the long off season. Also, we want to talk about the MVP and the All NALCS first team. And this is something that I want to remind people of every single year. These are regular season awards, even if they are announced throughout the playoffs and before finals for MVP. But anyone who is getting a vote, they're due Thursday night. So they're voting for first, second, third team. They're voting for MVP. They're voting for coach of the split. They're voting for rookie of the split. And as 3 people that get to vote, I wanted to talk about it. We are not able to reveal our vote here because obviously those are secret, but we can talk about favorites and where you're leaning because we haven't submitted our ballots until probably the end of Thursday. So what do you think? Let's start actually just with
I think we go top lane down. Just
the contenders for first team.
strongest players that we have seen.
Someday in
At each
Licorice, I
position.
think, is what everyone's going to be thinking about for top lane. Do you want to talk about them first before we move on next, or we want to kind of list out all the candidates? Yeah. It's interesting to me because I think there's a lot of discussion I've been hearing around Cloud9. People who have been kind of like arguing against Licorice almost. I've been hearing a lot of discussion about the fact that, but Licorice was there the whole time and they didn't do well until Jensen and Sneaky were back and that sort of thing. And to me, Licorice, even when they were losing, was performing very well. And I think that that is one of the most impressive things for me. Even when his team was failing, he looked like he was individually succeeding quite a lot. Down the stretch, I think when the team had been doing really well, also he was still a standout for me. He has been performing exceptionally well. I think it's tough. If you're talking about MVP, it's a different story because people can steal votes. But for top lane in particular, Someday has also been so good, but because they started to struggle more down the end of the split, I think that kind of does hurt his case a little bit. And it's always hard when you are recency bias does play a major factor, right? You're obviously supposed to take the entire split, all the games into consideration. But the fact that 100 Thieves started to struggle a little bit down the stretch, the fact that Cloud9 have had such a monumental run, does kind of start to.
So something on the recency bias, because people always bring that up. To me, also, there is a little bit of extra weight on the end of the season because the games are higher pressure.
Yeah.
And because teams also approach games at the beginning of the season a little bit differently, knowing that they can try some other things out, they can be a little bit more loose with their strategies. And as you get down the stretch, it does become more important. So while there is recency bias, there's also a real reason to weight the later games a little bit more. So there's some valid things there as well.
Yeah, and if I wanted to make a case for Someday, I was very impressed by a lot of his middle of the season games when 100 Thieves was funneling, because I felt like almost every top laner in the league whose team was funneling would fall hideously far behind every single game as the other team just camped top and crushed him. And Someday was actually carrying those games more than Cody's son about half the time with the straight up 1v1 or straight up 1v2 top lane the entire game. I feel like Someday took his game back to the level that people were expecting him to have when he first came here as one of the top 3 top laners in the world. And I think Licorice was right there competing with him. But yeah, I think Someday was maybe a little bit more impressive based on the resources he had to get for himself.
Sounds like both of you guys are leaning more Someday sided.
I'm more Licorice sided
for the
I
people.
think.
Oh, really? Because
Yeah.
you're like anti-Licorice.
No, I'm saying that's the argument that a lot of people are making is that like when I have talked about Licorice, people are like, yeah, but he was only like they were always losing until Sneaky and Jensen came in, and just my point was only that I felt even when the team was losing individually, he was performing very well. And when I think of like these, the first team, I think of individual performance, not like just how it doesn't have to be your team had to be at the top for you to be the best.
Yeah, I think there's a lot more impressive things about Licorice as well, because I'm actually on the Licorice side. Even though he is still so young, he has had such good laning phase in multiple different areas, right? It's not just split pushing God, playing Fiora and stuff like that, and all these good matchups. His Poppy absolutely demolished lane as well. He had the highest CSD at 10, highest gold difference at 10, experience difference at 10. He's smashing lanes on whatever the team needs. Sometimes it is split pushers, sometimes it's tanks. But I just felt like he was also so flexible in what he was pulling out. Plus playing those, tanks and peeling in the mid game in the team fights as well. So I don't know. I thought that Licorice was just so impressive this split.
And I wanted to just put some numbers out there since people might not necessarily remember who exactly was playing on C9 when. So Licorice played in all 18 games. He was the only C9 player to do so. Jensen actually played in 13 games.
Yep.
He was 9-4. Sneaky played in 12. He was 10-2. And Blabber played in 9. He was 8-1. So there was a lot of different roster iterations. Essentially, the Licorice games without Jensen, he was 2-3. So it's not like he was this last place top laner until Jensen came in.
Yeah.
There was a lot of volatility with that C9 roster throughout the entire year, and just having the actual numbers there, I think, can help influence the decision.
And like Azale said, in the losses, a lot of them were like
Him trying to
Licorice
1v9.
actually trying to 1v9 these games, and carry a lot of the teams.
And one of the things, like I always hear people talking about Someday's laning, like Huni even has referenced him as like the only other top laner he felt had LCK quality, laning in the NALCS and this sort of thing.
That was a while ago. That was like before the split, right?
Yeah, that was at the end of last split. But like people over the years with Someday and NA have always referenced his laning as such a strong point. And when I was kind of looking at laning stats, like CSD at 10 is always a big one for me. He's on average actually down, despite the fact that when you look at his champion pool, he's down on average 1.4. Like the champions that he has played throughout this, there's actually like a lot of picks that he had that were counter picks that were like advantageous matchups, aggressive matchups. Like he has lots of GP games. He had multiple Aatrox and Darius games.
Are you talking about Someday?
Yes.
Okay.
So he has actually picked for like lane winning matchups a fair number of the time. Even in comparison to Licorice, yet Licorice has like better laning stats. He's up 7 CS at 10 on average, and he has more Shen games and Ornn and these kind of like considered losing matchup type champions.
So I'll agree with you that Someday's laning stats don't look great, but I also think it's unfair to hold that against him because of all the funnel games and all the times he was playing not to lose. Like, sure, he'd pick a strong
It's definitely
champion,
true.
but he's not allowed to play aggressive without getting ganked. And I think Someday's biggest strengths have actually been his game sense and his team fighting.
Yeah.
Finding the right moments. Like, there were at least 2 or 3 games where if Someday didn't pull off this miraculous play, 100 Thieves just loses.
Yeah, no, I
and then they
completely
wouldn't
agree.
even be in playoffs. So that's why I'm leaning towards Someday.
heroic-
Yeah. I was just
Jack's game.
I was gonna add on to that. Jungle proximity makes a whole
Totally.
huge difference in this.
Yeah.
I know top
And
laners.
his stats are by far the best for sure.
Yep.
Top laners always joke about top is jungle difference. And I need to talk to stats a little bit more about that. But from the eye test, you feel like he got less attention. All right. Speaking of jungle, though, let's move on to jungle. The number 1 role, best role, most influential, biggest brains. I think that.
Most influential. So when you lose, it's your fault.
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
who was between?
Junglers are used to taking all the flame, Azale.
Okay.
It's
Yeah,
not.
why don't they get the credit
It's
too?
nothing
Kobe
new.
said?
Yeah, exactly.
okay.
It's their fault.
One guy who has got actually two guys who have gotten a lot of the credit and deservedly so are Smithy and Dardoch.
Okay.
I think that's what most of the discussion will be around.
What about Blabber?
There have been guys like Blabber.
What about Santorin?
There have been. Santorin's been good, but he has not been. I don't think he's on the same level as Smithy and Dardoch nearly for the same discussion. Smithy and Dardoch changed the entire game that they're in merely, in Champion Select even. People play differently because they're versus these guys. So I think those are the two. Azale, what is your front runner right now? And is it even one of those two guys? Do you have actually a Blabber coming in with the Kindred backed up by Zillion?
I don't really
maybe
have,
for rookie status.
Yeah, I don't really have like a solid front runner just yet for jungle. Like I think it's going to be pretty hard for me to actually decide this one. But I do think that like in my mind, just like the three that I will at least kind of be looking and digging more heavily into is probably Dardoch, Smithy, and Blabber. I do think that like there is argument to be made that you have to have played more games. I've heard that kind of discussion. Like I'm curious how you guys see that, because to me Blabber has played enough that like he can be considered, right? And he has had an extremely dominant 9 games. That is only half of the season, but like I feel that you can still kind of make the argument. I don't know where I will put him on my ballot. I don't know that he will for sure be on there, but right now, yeah, it's between those three guys. And like Dardoch, I think has had incredibly high highs. I think he has had some very low lows as well, as you often do get with him. Smithy is just so ridiculously consistent that like I think he always has that kind of working for him. Like he very rarely has the super bad games. There's one game I can think of where that one game where he got like level 3 at like 6 minutes or something. He was like multiple levels behind where he really botched the early game. But that's the only one that super stands out in my mind, at least right now, where it's like, oh my God, what were you doing? And even that game he won and got back into.
You almost want to give him credit for those games in a straight.
But he
way.
put himself in that situation too.
I want some more of your reasoning
Blabber?
behind Blabber, because to me, like Dardoch and Smithy, like there's no contest even of putting Blabber up there.
Again, I haven't looked through it all and actually fully decided, but like in my mind, I think he is worth looking more at because of the simple fact he's 8-1. A lot of the games, like he has been credited very heavily, even by his teammates, like Jensen and Sneaky and these guys talking in interviews about, hey, this is really what the team needed. We needed an aggressive player. We were too passive in the past. The Inven interview that just came out with Jensen, even reading that, he was talking about the fact that they needed to be more proactive and that Blabber is doing that for the team. So the players on his team feel that he is a real difference maker in the way that he plays, and that's something that I've noticed as well. Like watching them, is that he, like, even if he's on Kindred, he's freaking jumping forward and he's doing all these things that like seem to work well, and he does work very well with Jensen.
Yeah. All right. So I think you guys are sleeping on Santorin. We'll get on that in a bit. I also do want to discuss playing 9 games versus playing 18 games.
Yeah.
Because everyone is free to have their own opinion about this. This is the way that I look at it. I think it should be a detriment, because you can't just say, oh, you did great for half of the time.
Yeah,
therefore, you're going to be great the whole time.
Yeah.
But I do also think that if you overperform in those 9 games, you can still be considered for these types of awards. And Blabber helped generate 8 wins in his 9 games. Dardoch helped generate 10 wins in his 18 games, right? So the percentage that Blabber was very successful was there. My opinion of Dardoch, actually, I soured on him a little bit towards the end of the split while Echo Fox was struggling, because I think much like we hold it against Huni, that he has so many isolated deaths and dies so frequently in unnecessary situations, I think Dardoch does a lot of those same things. He leads the league in jungler deaths. I think he's 3rd overall in deaths as well. So even though he does have those big standout moments, he has way more really bad moments as well.
I definitely contest that it's way more.
Way more than other junglers?
Way more moments that he's bad than he's worse?
No.
contract
The way that
No.
the way that you phrased it, you said even though he has all these moments where he's carrying the team, he has way
more bad moments than other junglers.
Okay, you should
I
definitely.
think the good and the bad generally balance him to still be a good jungler, right? But I don't necessarily I feel like Blabber has been 90% good, whereas Dardoch has had 60% of his plays be good. Numbers out of the top of my head. I think he's had a lot of bad moments that we're overlooking.
I am not overlooking those. I think that a lot of those are due to the team.
Contracts has the most deaths for junglers, but Dardoch's at 61.
Dardoch and Huni have the second and third most.
Yeah.
Dardoch and Huni. And again, I think that is a lot due to the team environment. And if I'm looking at this award as like who I want on my all-star team, so if I'm the coach or whatever, and I'm taking these guys to Worlds, that's kind of how I usually look at first team is like, what would North America's best chance at winning Worlds be? I pick Dardoch because
that's interesting because that immediately when you said that argument, I'm like, God, no, I don't want Dardoch. Because
I feel like I can definitely utilize that.
Control him.
I could definitely utilize the power to the benefit of North America.
Dardoch and against Dardoch.
I mean, my argument when you're talking about like if it is the thought process of not like who is the most talented or performed just the best here, if the argument is your first team is who you want to take to Worlds is that NA Dream Team, I just feel like Dardoch has proven time and time again that he is like mentally like not. He just tilts. He gets
People
frustrated,
change.
angry. Yeah,
People change, Azael.
I don't think he has. I don't think he has at all. So that's my problem. Like I think that he is extremely talented. I would consider him for first team. But if the argument is this should be the team that you send to Worlds, I think Smithy wins like easily. Because to me, Smithy is the only jungler out of this whole pool that has proven internationally, that has shown that they can play calmly under pressure, that has showed up consistently in those big moments. Dardoch has never even made it to Worlds, right?
Yeah, we're looking to win Worlds though. We're not just looking to go to Worlds.
I mean, Smithy has had the best.
You have to get. You're either first or last, Azael.
Performance ever.
You can go there with Smithy, but are you gonna win Worlds with him?
I mean, maybe with the right pieces around him, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, he had the best international performance NA has ever had.
Would you contest that Dardoch has better mechanics?
No, but that's not the argument that was being made.
Yeah, I know.
To
We're
me,
doing both sides.
It's just interesting because that is just immediately what I thought. Like I was kind of with you with like I'm thinking Dardoch could definitely be in there, but then you're like, this is the one I want to take the world. I'm like, whoa, hold up here, Kobe. This is the guy I want to slam some regular season games that carry some games maybe, but. I think his downside is so big, and that like even in NA, I'm kind of just looking at some stuff, and it's interesting. Like I was shocked to see this. He's down on average 482 gold at 15. Like that was very surprising for me for Dardoch. And when I think about stuff like that, when I think about like when he does have those bad situations and those bad games, I feel that international junglers and international teams are so incredibly good at punishing that. When you fall behind, they start taking everything. They start invading you. They start getting vision everywhere. And like
so,
Smithy feels more stable.
Just not looking at stats, looking at the actual games has given me so much more confidence in Dardoch's decision making. And the reason why a lot of those situations that you bring up, I feel like I could see why he was making these super risky and overly aggressive plays. And it felt like he was in a situation where he was like, I have to take the high percentage or low percentage, high reward, aggressive play to try and pull the game back. There's so many games where like Echo Fox is down 2,000 gold from Huni dying top side, and the bottom lane feeding or losing tower. Then all of a sudden you see on your screen Dardoch gets a double kill in the enemy jungle by himself on Graves, and they pull the game back.
Yeah,
I remember that one specifically. That was like versus. Maybe it was versus Cloud9 or something. He was in the top side enemy jungle. They're down like 3,000 gold.
When they died on bottom
on Graves.
Side.
He gets a double kill by himself.
Yeah.
And they actually win the game and pull it back.
I think that had to be TL because that's the only
or
one
maybe it's Team
more than one
Liquid.
kill.
Even better,
Great.
the number one team. Those are the situations that I'm looking at. So like, yes, stats can
inform.
Stats can exactly. They can kind of give you a roadmap to look at what stories to look for. Yeah. But especially, I disagree with so many of the European junglers that also came over during Rift Rivals, and we're talking about not only his mechanics, but the way that he does approach the early game, especially. I just think that it was really well thought out.
To be fair, I think
I
that, like,
do not
his,
contest though that he has the possibility of tilting, and I agree with you.
very inconsistent.
That's definitely going to be the area that you have to put the most attention into.
and at Rift Rivals, I would say that was like some of his like best group of games of the whole split, right? Like
And that
I
shouldn't
thought
influence this vote at all.
Exactly.
Because it's a regular season award.
like I thought he performed very well there,
This
which is
player.
like so like the ELCS players all being like, yep, Dardock's smurfing every game, like you know they obviously. That is his upside, and I think that is the potential that he can hit. I just don't think he always hits it, and when he doesn't, like I just picture that Smithy game where it was the horrible start. You put Dardock in that game, and I'm like, well, Dardock's 0-15. Like Dardock's like level 1, just running it down.
Yeah.
Like that is a game that I think you just lose with that player. But maybe he wouldn't have gotten himself in this situation.
That's what I'm saying. I feel like it's so heavily between these two junglers that it's hard for other junglers to kind of enter into at least the conversation for top spot.
Yeah.
It's like you have the angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other shoulder.
What about Blabber? Where does he fall in there? Because I feel like he does a lot of the crazy aggressive stuff that Dardock does.
He's too new and he hasn't played
Not
enough games. They themselves, in him coming in, set it up with, all right, this guy has made a lot of boneheaded mistakes. We're very scared about bringing him to the LCS stage. So even though like we haven't seen those big catastrophes on stage, I feel like I've experienced them because all his teammates talk about it.
well, his teammates also talk about how good he is.
Yeah.
And that's why he's playing.
But in the process of bringing him on, they were like, all right, the reason we didn't bring him on earlier, is because of these issues.
Yeah.
That being said, if we are looking at the award and you're like, you just have to judge by what we saw on stage in these games, then I think you have a good argument.
Yeah, and I do think that if Blabber had played all 18 games, the first 9 would not have been as good as the last 9.
Yeah.
Like,
That's
he was.
That's why Reaper, the genius coach, did not put him in.
I don't think they go
Or if he
16 and
played
2.
18, there's a
but do
chance.
they have a better record? Are they first place if they play all of the games with Blabber and with this lineup?
I think if they put him in a week earlier, then they might tie Team Liquid for first. Because I think there was that 0-9 Svenskar and Gragas game where I'm thinking you put Blabber in there, maybe he has a better game there. But I think it's close, and that's why it's really hard to place Blabber. I do want to just talk quickly about Santorin, who I feel like has found a lot of success on a team that doesn't have traditionally dominant laners and has had a very effective year. He's actually only 1 or 2 kills behind Dardock as the highest kill jungler in the league, which is not what you would ever expect when you hear the name Santorin. His lanes are usually losing. He's managed to win over half the games. I think he's had a very good split. I can't think of bad Santorin games, but I can think of a number of good Santorin games. So I think he's getting slept on. I'm not putting him first.
I know.
And I don't think he's going to get top 3 just because he's on FlyQuest, but I think he deserves it.
I want to delve deeper into you can't think of any bad Santorin games. I think that those may be eclipsed by bad FlyQuest games for you, and you just kind of have written it off as that was a bad FlyQuest
I'm gonna look
game.
in and see if I can
Because
find
this out.
Santorin
egregious ones.
actually has the
Santorin.
lowest experience difference except for Grig. Grig is the only jungler that has a worse experience difference in the first 10 minutes of the game.
Right.
Santorin usually has not had super good early games. Same thing for CS is pretty low. I do agree, though. He has been so good for this team.
Yep.
And he has had a lot of the games like the Kazakhs game, where nobody
was an incredible
else
game.
was even playing Kazakhs, right?
Yep.
And he absolutely demolished the game. So those things really stick in your mind. I question if the bad ones you just kind of
He had 3 bad games at the very start of the year.
Yeah.
The very first 3 games
the
in
Zen
FlyQuest
games.
looked completely hopeless. From there, I feel like most of them look pretty solid. But anyway, we're going to dive more into that. I think jungle is actually one of the most interesting ones as far as which 3 people end up on the ballot in which order, because there's a lot of different ways you can look at Blabber, Santorin, Dardock, and even Xmithy. But let's do mid.
Sweet.
So this again, I
You
guess
got-
maybe like games played and everything comes into it. I definitely think Jensen should be for sure considered in the top 2. And then I would say if we're just saying 2, for me it'd be Jensen or PoE. Yeah, those would be the 2. Bjergsen's not even on my radar really right now. He had some incredible games.
Not
at
on
the
your
end.
radar? His goddamn Macaulay didn't have a blip on your radar?
hear
The
something?
LeBlanc?
For best of the split.
Yeah,
No,
but
he's-
not even on the radar.
Here's a
no.
stat.
I won't consider. I don't think he's
So-
considered. But those last two games were incredible.
Yeah.
The LeBlanc and the Collie game.
I got a fun fact about that Akali game.
Okay.
And also how outside of the norm it was. So prior to that game, Bjergsen was averaging a certain number of kills. How many games worth of kills was that Akali game?
Like 4.
Based on his season average.
I think more like 6, 7.
Yeah, it was 5 times the normal amount of kills in a game he got with that 14
Yeah.
kill. He was averaging like 2.8 kills a game.
I think-
And because of that game, he was first amongst mid laners in kills for the split.
I think that game, I said it in the cast, and I didn't actually go back to look through and see if I could find a more dominant game, but I think that was the biggest carry performance of the whole year.
Yeah, for sure.
Like,
there's no
year.
no contest.
Of the whole,
Including spring.
yeah. Of the whole year.
think so. Let me
but
check.
I would have to actually really look through it. Like, cause spring was a long time ago. There's games I'm
Yeah.
sure I'm forgetting, but like that game was so 1v9 and he even gets the Baron and stuff.
Yeah.
I was just like, oh my God.
Because we oftentimes during the split, we joke about players attempting to 1v9, right?
Yeah.
Where like, oh, the team is doing so
man
bad.
actually did.
Or, like Licorice is doing really well, or Sunday's doing really well, or
Yeah.
something. But Bjergsen 1v9 successfully, and they won the game as well.
Yep.
Yeah, you
Like-
don't get to 14 kills unless someone else on your team is super far behind. Otherwise, you win the game at 6 kills
Yeah.
or 7 kills.
Yeah, yeah.
You got to 14.
It's like he got 14 and secured the Baron, and he needed to do that to win.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, you can't do less than that, or you lose, Bjergsen. And he's like, all right, I got this.
That was the cherry on top, was the Baron thing too. They were in the pit, and I was like, oh, this is pretty risky this situation here. And he's like, got it.
The crazy thing about that to me is, so it was really good from Bjergsen to secure it, but I think that's the play of the split if Doublelift secures it. So if
Yeah.
he gets like one more crit,
Yeah.
if he like crits the Baron and gets that, because the man jumps, he was like trying to carry it pretty hard from his side, right? Buster shots Grig out of the pit, and I'm like, he's gonna do it.
Yeah.
And then Bjergsen got it. But still, that was a hell of an attempt. That was like this close to one of those plays that you always remember, but then you forget it.
Back to mid lane though.
Yeah.
So he's not a blip on your radar.
No.
Well, there
he's
is
a blip, but
discussion-
it's too
there is
little
discussion about who should be third.
Yeah.
Because there's actually a pretty big drop off
Yeah.
there.
For me, I just mean about first. Like
Yeah.
he will not be my 1st. I can say that with confidence. And I don't think he should be anyone's first when you're looking at the whole split.
Yeah, and I think PoE was the primary carry for Optic in a lot of games. I don't think PoE will be or should be in the MVP conversation because of a team that missed playoffs, but I think as far as mid lane, where I put less of an emphasis on needing to have team success, I thought PoE's individual performances throughout the entire split were insane. He had some games where it really did feel like close to a 1v9. He'd just take over the game as Smite Talon, or he'd take over the game as Victor. I thought he was just amazing this split, honestly.
Yeah. He and the team played so heavily around him. Like the team very clearly felt that like that is the way that they're going to win. That is the way that they have to do it. And I think he was super impressive, but I also do, despite the fact that Jensen had 5 less games, like statistically he's extremely impressive too.
I just also like that he was playing this utility pick, for the team, the Zillion, backing up Blabber, allowing Blabber to do, a lot of these aggressive plays that you were talking about. So it wasn't just, some sort of selfish picks like LeBlanc every game or something like that.
Yeah.
I think that adds some extra weight. I do want to bring up some more conversation though, because of course we've got PoE and Jensen are definitely up there. I think that Bjergsen is a blip on the radar.
First?
Probably doesn't have a good chance of getting first. But what do you guys think about the other Cloud9 mid laner? How well has Golden Glue done? Because people will instantly flame him whenever they hear his name as coming into the lineup.
Yeah.
Yet this split, because this is just a summer regular season split, he had so many strong performances, and a lot of them also were when they were, testing things at the beginning or whatever you want to call it, and struggling and losing some games. It was actually Golden Glue in a lot of them that still, had a good performance.
So I think individually he played very well. I still don't think he played individually as well as Jensen, the other guy in his team. But I do think as far as like this year, significantly raised my opinion of Golden Glue, because everyone has talked about, Scrim God forever, right? But this is the first year that I felt like I really saw it on stage. And yes, they lost a lot of those games, but to your point, they hadn't stabilized their roster, and him and Sven just slammed. It was TL, I believe, recently, right? Like that was pretty impressive. But I mean, he's played 7 games. He's 2-5. He had good individual performances, but it doesn't feel like enough for him to get into the top. But he still has
a place on the ballot for top 3.
I don't
Not for me,
think
I don't
so.
think
So I think
But I think he's way better than I used to.
I think there's a line somewhere with how much you have to play and what your sample size has to be. And 7 of the 18 games, with 2 of them being bot lane like brand games, it is just not enough.
And is 2 wins enough to be one of the best?
I think it's an interesting conversation.
Yeah, I think if you're talking about a mid lane power ranking or a mid lane value in trade discussions, Golden Glue's stock is way up after this split because he was ahead in CS in 6 out of his 7 games. He looked effective on almost all of his picks. He's been a very good scrim player for a while and now finally transitioned to stage. There's a chance he's still a threat in playoffs. Like all these things are very positive for Golden Glue, but these are split performance awards.
Yeah.
And dude played 7 games and won 2 of them. No way he's top 5.
Would he be a top, like performance wise though? Would he be a top 5 in North America? Would your power rankings have him up there? Because
yes.
I think he's gone up way up. But to me, that makes it tough then, because you're always going to be overshadowed. Like it's like great, he deserves time on a team. Does he deserve time on Cloud9, where maybe this guy is like even in MVP discussion, maybe this guy is the best mid laner in the league? Like Jensen, not only did he have those zillion picks and he played some Lulu and these defensive supports, he performed very well in those. But then his last 2 games, he was slamming on assassins, right? Like, and I think that is so powerful when you have someone who can be that flexible. And again, the InVent interview they just did, he was saying that like they are very happy to have him absorb bans and be picked late and do all this sort of thing, because he's like, I can play whatever, so I'm comfortable in any situation with that, and that can help them out, in some of the other roles. So that's another thing that I think he has done for them. But yeah, it is an interesting discussion because Golden Glue has I really think risen in stock.
Anything else on mid? I think Jensen was great. I think there will be people that can justify putting him first, but it's between him and PoE.
If you wanted to discuss one more, I think one that's actually dropped a lot because Clutch was struggling so much was Febiven. People were definitely a lot bigger on Febiven in the start. Do you think that is tied with the team falling down and it being like frustrating with the team, or what about his individual performance if you kind of isolate these rewards?
I think he was worse this split, and his team was worse this split. So he was really disappointing to me. Like, you can get away with being, and maybe this is just a team thing, and maybe this means we were overvaluing him last split, because last split he had the lowest forward percentage of almost all mid laners, but then we said, well, it's because he's always going even in lane, and then he smashes in team fights. And if they're 1,000 gold more down going into team fights, he's never going to be able to do that. But if you don't have any positive moments in the game, you're never making it onto the split. And I feel like he had very few positive moments. A couple at the start of the split before Clutch went on their large losing streak, and then none towards the last half of it. Febiven is not even close to my ballot.
Yeah, I definitely don't think he's in there, but I would disagree with that. He had no positive moments. I still think, like thinking back and looking over some of the games, but even towards the end of the split, I think he did have positive moments. I still think he had like some strong team fighting, and still think he did play well at times, but not like, I do agree with your point about like he's not enough of a difference maker. And if your team is very stable and can always hold even in lanes, and you can just play to be late and then dominate in team fights, then that's great, and that's how that works for you. But if your team is falling behind, then you need to be able to do something different and be more proactive, right? Like we've seen Bjergsen swap onto assassins, and everyone talks about how passive TSM is, but then he could be the proactive person. So like, to be one of the absolute best performers in the league, I think you need to have that proactivity. You need to be able to show different styles, and I think that is something that he has failed to do. And could you kind of like copy paste him into another team like 100 Thieves and have him perform better? Maybe you could.
I think so, actually,
because 100 Thieves seems to be able to have that kind of like even play style. Top lane puts pressure, then maybe Febiven fits in super well there and looks really good again, but he didn't perform well in this split. And again, it's not power rankings. It's how did you do on the stage this split? And he didn't change his style if he needed to. it never really came together for being top 3. But I still think he's super talented.
What do you think, Kobe?
I was
Should he
already
sneak
going to
into
move.
any ballots?
I was going to move. No, Febivin?
Yeah.
I don't think so for this split. I was ready to move on to the Double Lift Award. AD carry position.
How dare you?
Who do you think have been
Also,
the best
yes.
AD carries, my friend?
Also double it. Who's the other one though? That's the interesting. If we're talking like our 2 contenders, is there even a contender?
I mean,
does he just win by default?
Because then you're down like Sneaky, Stixay. Actually, even as bad as CLG were doing, their bottom lane was probably the highlight for this team.
Yeah.
So maybe you can do some wiggle room there.
What about Cody Sun?
Definitely, maybe.
Cody Sun at all?
There is Sven, Wild Turtle, Cody Sun, Deftly. There's like this grouping of
And like
AD
everyone that
carries.
you name, the games that pop into my mind out of memory are like them getting blasted,
Yeah.
probably by Double Lift.
To be fair, there's a few games where Double Lift got blasted, but it's when he didn't
true.
have a ranged auto-attacking champion.
Yeah.
Yeah, his Vladimir games
Just
were ugly.
Blame
Or
him for
at
not
least
doing
one
that.
was ugly.
And that is part of the role as well. Like it's a bot lane award.
Yeah.
But Double Lift, just so it doesn't seem like we're brushing him aside, he was the primary win condition for Team Liquid in all of their wins, and they're the first place team. And even though he doesn't have the most kills, I think that goes to Cody Sun. But it's also because when Team Liquid wins, they win fast. They have the lowest like win time. It's something like 32 minutes, whereas 100 Thieves plays 40-minute games, so his kills are going to be slightly less. Dominates laning phase, seemingly hard carries a lot of their games, and their whole team is built around him. So you could dock him for that, say, oh yeah, put someone else in that position, and they're not going to carry as much. But legitimately, they did it, and they're the first place team. So
Yeah.
you can't really take that away from him.
And it's insane that he's been playing since the very beginning. He has so much experience. He's been to Worlds so many times. If I am looking at it as, like I kind of pitched it earlier, the team that I'm
Going to
building
Worlds?
to go win Worlds,
I'll check that box with you.
100% it's Double Lift. Actually, 100% of the time.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a discussion.
Some people might
isn't
argue
us casting our
Sneaky, though.
votes, but this is like our discussion
I
is
think he should
pretty
win.
narrow. Yeah.
I think he should win 100%, but to play devil's advocate about the going to Worlds, I think you would have a lot of fans out there who would argue Sneaky for going to Worlds.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because so while I totally agree, Double Lift has been the most dominant North American marksman, I think that he should be number 1 this split. Sneaky internationally has done more, has done better, right? Double Lift, it seems like every time he goes international, all right, sweet, we're going to play Kog'Maw, we're going to wait till a game, all right, we lost, like it does feel like we have not seen that international track record for Double Lift.
There are
Just
big
to play
moments-
devil's advocate, just to play devil's advocate.
Yeah, no. I think it's good to bring that up because you shouldn't all tunnel vision
Yeah.
on a single point of discussion. Sneaky is one of the ones that we listed as one of the possible contenders here, and him coming back in after he's been motivated on the academy team has looked quite good. He did play, the mages for them as well, but. It's not quite the same effect as the Double Lift split that this summer split has been. As Jao was talking about, even when other points on the team are failing,
He's looked good.
it seems like Double Lift is always looks good. And there haven't here been those moments where the victor dashing in, getting lasered in a critical situation or something.
saves
like
that for later.
or this way, or the people memeing him for not using his
Yeah.
flash in a situation or something like that.
Yeah.
So that's why I think it feels so one-sided. But like I said, Sneaky and Stixay probably maybe Lost coming in and changing the face of Echo Fox. But then I feel like Lost is probably too limited on
Varus.
Varus as far as that success goes.
Yeah, I feel like Sven has actually had a pretty solid split, and that's a tricky one because their bottom lane with Sven and Mithy has definitely had some pretty bad games. They've also had some pretty good ones where they were applying a lot of bottom lane pressure. Like, it's so strange because I feel like TSM got Sven and Mithy to be this consistent shot calling rock of a bottom lane, but they've kind of been anything but. They sometimes feed the early game, and then sometimes they just totally smash the laning phase and kind of take over the game. I think from a who would I want on my team or who would I want to go to Worlds with, Sven is way up there in this one, and I think his performance was actually pretty good throughout the split. So
Can you
I think he's gonna
detach
show up
him
on the
from
ballot.
Mithy if you're talking about the team that you're bringing?
I think
though?
that's what you have to do when you're filling out these ballots. Like you're trying to isolate the position within the greater context, right? So I think Sven should be in there.
It's really interesting, and like Stixay, I almost want to talk about. Almost, it sounds funny, but almost through the Golden Glue lens of like his like when you look at wins and losses and stuff, it's obviously pretty garbage, right? Like, but statistically, he has been extremely impressive. His actual laning is super good. He's like the only person who has maybe better laning stats is Doublelift himself, and even then, it's like not much of a difference as far as the actual in lane stats. And then it becomes how much do you dock him for? Okay, well you didn't win those games with that, right? Like how much is his fault? How much is his team's fault? How much do you kind of like credit the laning phase without detracting from the rest of the game performance? And that's where I think it becomes tough. But I think as far as like actual individual performances, he has looked very good for the most part on a bad team. It's not like it has felt that Reignover is, taking over all these games and camping for him nonstop and this sort of thing. Like I have often felt like Reignover is more frequently on the top side and, around mid lane. I would have to actually look at jungle proximity stats, but I think like he is at least in the consideration for a top 3. Again, this one seems the most one-sided. That Doublelift I think should win for sure. But I think that, 2 and 3, there's a lot of arguments to be made for kind of a handful of guys that we mentioned. So it does become, I think, very, very tough after that. Because for next 2 spots, Sven, I think Stixay is worth considering. I think Sneaky is worth considering. You could talk about Cody Sun. Like even just if you're considering those 4, and maybe people can make arguments for others, but it gets pretty tough.
Sports, the hardest one to get concrete data on.
Yeah.
The most eye test position in our sport.
Yeah, this one's really hard.
Yeah.
Because even guys like, I don't even know who my top guys should be, because, you talk about some of the guys who maybe kind of fly under the radar, but have been getting a lot of credit from their team themselves, like Big, right? Big, I think, has stepped in and had a really big kind of effect on his team. I think that another guy, JJ, who's not a super big name, but I think has really has felt like a difference maker for FlyQuest. And then obviously there's guys like Olay and Afromoo still, and
I think Zeyzal made a big step up this
Zeyzal was
split
really
as well
good.
with Cloud9's run.
There's a lot of good
support is
supports.
often tied to team success, a little bit like the coach of the split award is, because it's hard to know the intangibles that they bring. Vision control, laning, team fighting are all very important. I mean, Afromoo was the MVP last split. I don't think he necessarily fell flat on his face this
not at
split,
all.
so I think he's probably going to be right up there with anybody else this split, and I think Zeyzal and Big and some of the other guys you mentioned are going to be in that conversation as well. Kobe?
Afromoo actually, interesting enough, has the most deaths of all supports.
And most assists.
He's making stuff happen.
Not saying that is, make or break.
How
stat or
dare
whatever.
you?
No, true.
But I don't think either of you said Biofrost. And if we are saying Stixay, and the laning.
The laning was
a lot
nasty.
of it has been Biofrost as well. But again, CLG did so poorly in the
8
second
game
half.
losing streaks hurt your chances.
We mentioned both of those guys, but it's like kind of a half-hearted, like, painful to do because they, they had such a bad second half of the split.
So what about this? 2 guys notably absent, I would say, from anyone's mentioning so far, Hakuo and Smoothie, who have both been in my top 3, before for the voting
In spring.
right? So it's like now we're here in summer, and like Hakuo doesn't even come to my mind almost anymore as far as top of the split for supports. And I had always thought he was such a strong performer. Do you think the team performed poorly around him and that made him look worse, or did Hakuo actually have a bad split?
I think Hakuo had a bad split.
Yeah, I think this is one of the ones where people really have to, again, remember that it is a summer split award.
It's not
and you
year,
have
it's
to,
not career.
Earmuffs on, separate all the things
But he was good last year.
Yeah, separate all those things. And it's so hard with Smoothie too, because it wasn't his fault, right? He was on the academy roster, and he didn't even get traded to Echo Fox till later. And then this is a new team, and Echo Fox is a very unique team as far as the internal, whatever you want to call it, culture or style goes for them.
Yeah.
But I think that he, in the situation he was put in, performed really well. And adapted very quickly to all these things that he had to do with. So I still thought it was very impressive, even though again it's going to bring up this is one of the guys that didn't have a large number of games over the split.
He had 10 of the 18 and had a 50% win rate
Yeah.
in those 10.
He's kind of like, I almost look at it again like the power ranking situation, where I'm like, if I was placing value on each support, I still think I would have Smoothie very high in the league. But as far as performance for this split, I don't think I could justify putting him in the top 3 because, as far as like, wasn't his fault. I know what you mean, but at the same time, hey, maybe like if Cloud9 thinks that Zeyzal is better and he's performing better, then like at some point that is kind of your fault, you know what I mean? Like it is your responsibility to like play well enough to get put on stage or whatever. But I totally know what you mean, and I think that I could definitely see him being valued as one of the top supports in the league, but I don't think his on-stage summer split performance was good enough to kind of warrant being considered for the top.
What about Zeyzal?
Oh, okay.
Well, you can go. You look like you were
I was ready to go
jump
with
on it.
something. What about Ole?
Ole.
Because
I mentioned
I
Ole.
feel like in the Immortals days and even last split, you're thinking this godlike support who takes over games, and then there's been this adjustment period playing with Doublelift. There was the MSI thing that's in everyone's mind where he kind of benched himself halfway through the tournament.
Got earmuffs on, Jet. That's
But
not summer split.
that's not part of the summer split.
Yeah.
Exactly. And if we're going to say Doublelift is all the way at the top, you don't get there without your support being pretty good. Right? Well, that's just kind of the conversation I have
it's
because
the
my
same
gut
argument with
right
Thick
now
with 6 a.m. Biofrost, right?
my gut right now is to not have Ole in my top 3 because I might be influenced by these outside factors. But if you're like the second half of the split, Ole was crushing, right?
Well, I mean, remembering back to a lot of the individual games, there's definitely been some clear mistakes. And then we even had team communication actually come out later. And some of the clear mistakes where I was like, Ole, what are you doing?
It was Doublelift telling him to do it.
Yeah, it turns out, someone told him to do it, or there was, communication going on at the time. Me, however, the communication like that and how you react in those situations and whether you do everything that someone tells you to or you can take it in quickly and make the judgment for yourself or something like that is part of how you judge a player and is especially part of how you judge a support.
That's what I was going to say.
So while there are arguments for both sides and he has had some very good games, he has made some very big plays for the team. There have also been if you're given lenses of other players to relate it to, I would have the Dardoch lens maybe for Ole because a lot of them, and especially like I just see over and over the Tom Kench eating a minion that's next to Doublelift. That's a thing that is a mechanical execution in the game. There are buttons where you can target champions only.
You can use the frames too.
You can bind it to whatever you want. You can use the frames. There are other ways to pull off that play. And if there are situations like that, that's why I take away, some points. It's support, as you said, is one of those holistic. It's like almost semi-coaching problem where we don't know, all of the internal stuff, and that it has a pretty.
It's basically an eye test award, I feel like, because deaths for a support can also be like good deaths, right? And assists are just, we have long games, right? So it's very much do I feel like this guy is consistently making the right decision versus the wrong decision, and is he making plays?
Yeah, and it's so interesting because so much of like when I talk to the pros and they're crediting us aboard, it's about their tracking of summoners, it's about their like tracking of state on the map on like, oh, this person is missing, watch out, they could be here, this sort of thing, like knowing where all the wards are going to be placed, anticipating where your opponents are going to do all these things.
Macro for the team.
I feel like a lot of the league is trying to make the support the shot calling role.
Yeah, it's the in-game coach. I really feel like it's like some of the teams I think. Well, it seems like most commonly jungle is like early game kind of like, caller, and then it's the support for a lot of the rest of the game. And that's so hard to judge unless you listen to full team comms. And like it was interesting though, you bring up the kind of comms of like that came out later where it's Doublelift telling Ole to go in this kind of bad situation, he goes and kills himself. And it's like, if that's Aphromoo, right? Like to take it to the most extreme.
Yeah.
And Doublelift says, go in. You got to engage.
He's like, nah, bro.
Exactly, right? He's like, no, give it up or whatever, right? You know what I mean? Like there's that, like there's, you have to at a certain point know that is the wrong play. And just because Doublelift said jump, you can't always say how high, right? You have to at a time know, like, I look at this situation, this is bad. I'm not going to do it. I'm sorry. Like that sucks. We'll wait till later. We'll scale. We'll do whatever, right? But I think Ole deserves considerations for sure. Like you don't have that good of a laning phase as Doublelift with you know, like a dead weight support. You really don't.
Yeah, if
Right.
I am building the team to go win worlds, I don't want any of the players to need to be micromanaged to any degree, like 0% of that. So, agree.
The most talked about award is the most valuable player award. Who do you think is in the running for that? We're 50
I
minutes
mean,
in.
we
because
just we
these are
just went over the
conversations.
the strongest players of each role.
Yep.
So I feel like we listed, the candidates as far as you pick the ones from the two that we put in most places.
Yeah.
And now it's kind of just a fight between roles.
Yeah, and I basically already made an argument for this on the analyst desk 3 days ago. So I will talk about Doublelift here in the fact that oftentimes MVP is best player on best team, but here I feel like even if Team Liquid might not have been the best, I still might consider Doublelift because he is the primary win condition in so many of their games, and he's been a high performer in all of those games. The second place team is Cloud9, who has had so many different players and so many different strategies. It's really hard to nail down where the value most heavily lies. Jensen has been great. Blabber has been great. Licorice has been great. Sneaky's been 10-2. Zazel's even been a good shot caller. I think Jensen and Licorice are the two MVP candidates on C9, and there's a chance they take votes from each other because people will have different reads on who was most contributing to their success throughout the year.
Yeah.
But when you look at Team Liquid, it was Doublelift who most contributed to their success and their first place.
Through that lens, what about you have to then think about Someday, right? Like I think the third place team, to me, like he was one of the biggest reasons for sure. Yes, they like a lot of their playstyle is about Cody Sun, but I feel I've always felt like Someday buys them the time to play slow because he does play aggressively. He does make plays around the map. He is creating pressure and absorbing pressure. And I think that is something that, like when I think about 100 Thieves, I immediately think of Someday, and he has been really, I think, responsible for a lot of their good performances. So I would throw his name into the ring as well. The kind of three that you mentioned plus Someday, so like would be, I think, probably who just off the top of my head I would be considering most heavily.
I agree.
And I feel like
I feel like they'll get the majority of the votes.
this
Yeah.
is one of the years where there actually won't be as much controversy over this MVP award.
You think?
Yeah, I mean, because
Ooh.
as you're saying, and you go down the list, like, do you feel confident nominating anyone from Echo Fox with how up and down their season has been? I guess the first name that I would put forward would be Dardoch.
But I don't think there's a
But
chance.
exactly, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
From Echo Fox, do you put anyone forward as an MVP
No.
because they have all had big moments of mistakes, and to double its credit, this has been the season where even when the team is playing performing really badly, he hasn't had the meme play or whatever where people usually pick out one
Yeah.
thing that he did.
My one thing that I would
I
bring
think
up,
Cloud9's probably the closest.
yeah, my one thing I would kind of bring up as far as like there being frustrations or whatever, or like questions about why someone got it or didn't get it, is there's been so much talk about Doublelift hasn't been an MVP, has never won the MVP award, and everyone thinks of Doublelift as an MVP caliber player. How much does it come into consideration for a lot of people with the fact that it's like, yeah, Doublelift deserves it, right? Like Doublelift should get one. I'm not saying he doesn't deserve it, but it's the fact that he hasn't for so long, I think works in his favor because it starts to be one of those cases where people are like, well, yeah, he definitely should get one. Like, how do I give him one almost?
You're like, oh, this is the year, perfect. Ah.
Like, you know what I mean? And it's, again, it's not to say that he doesn't deserve it. I think he very well could. But there's like that sort of discussion is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also think
Yeah.
because we're mainly focusing on teams that have had success and at the top of the bracket, right? All the teams you listed, basically 1 through 4. You're picking and choosing your candidates for most valuable player for their team.
PoE.
I think Power of Evil also has even though they didn't even make it into playoffs, right? Getting them to 9-9 after their poor spring split and hard carrying also a bunch of their games. I feel like this might be the other tact as far as that argument does go for being most valuable to their team, even though the team overall didn't hit the top of the standings.
Yeah. It's definitely very interesting. And one thing I wanted to mention, I wanted to kind of go through the whole discussion before I brought it up at all.
Okay.
Is
Hit
this
us.
the first time that it feels like people aren't even considering TSM members? And I'm not saying that's incorrect at all.
I think
but
some
just
people
like,
probably considering.
but it's very interesting, right? Because when you think about over the last couple of years, the first team, it feels like almost always, like I would have to go back and actually look through it, but it feels like almost always has a couple TSM guys, right? I remember at one point I wanted to say it was like 4 TSM members in 2016 when they were super slamming and stuff.
They had
and that
4
was,
on first team, yeah, because there was 17-1.
and that was the most extreme. And again, not saying it's undeserving, but just like, oh, how the mighty have fallen, right? Like we're not really talking about anyone.
Is that
from
a
TSM.
surprise?
Not saying it is, but I think that people will be surprised. Just like thinking historically, right? People are so used to seeing first team, lots of TSM members. Of course, Bjergsen's in the conversation for MVP. He was won so many times. Like all these guys. But we go through all these roles, and none of them are really up there. And again, not saying that's wrong. It's just interesting because this has historically been the most dominant team in North America. And it really, to me, has kind of shown like it's like a sign of the times, right? Like as far as how they have not performed.
Yeah, I don't think that if you consider what has happened with this team this year, I don't think it's surprising at all.
Yeah, it's
they
totally
didn't make playoffs for the first time, or they didn't go to finals weekend at all. Then
I have an answer to your question.
Okay.
2016 spring is the last time they didn't have someone in the top 3 of MVP.
Okay. But did they have anyone first team?
They were 9-9.
Okay.
I don't think they did.
That would be really
because Jensen was first team mid. That was the Immortals year.
Okay.
So it was actually 4 Immortals and Jensen on first team because they were 17-1 that split with their only loss being to CLG. But this was a very similar split to that for TSM, where they're struggling for most of the year. They just switched out most of their roster, and it didn't click. They went to finals that year.
Yep.
Da, da, da.
Dun dun dun.
But yeah, I agree with you, and that's because of TSM struggle. Last thing is, to a point you brought up earlier, Kobe, where you said you don't think this year will be that controversial. There's still something in the back of my mind that thinks,
compared to other years, MVP is always controversial. I know some people are mad already.
Yeah, the C9
I'm
guys.
pre-mad.
Because there is a very strong argument to make that C9 is right now the best team in the league.
Yeah.
Because they've won 9 of 10, including 2 wins over Team Liquid.
Again, the difficulty, though, is then you have to choose on that
I know,
team.
that's the thing, though. But I think there is a chance that Licorice and Jensen get a lot of votes.
I think they should get a lot of votes.
They get a lot of votes, but Doublelift wins, and people are saying, well, that's not fair. They were better. They're on the better team. They just kind of cannibalized each other.
We'll see, because that's where the controversy, I think, will eventually lie. The year that Arrow won, Haunter and Bjergsen were 2 and 3. So
yeah, they took
stole votes from
each
each other. Anyway, that'll be fun.
I 100% agree, but I think that's why we can kind of see where it's trending, right?
Yeah.
There's no doubt that Licorice and Jensen have both been great, and even like you can mention so many of the players on the Cloud9 roster. They have so many good ones. I think they're the ones heading in with the most value on this full 7-man roster that you're allowed to bring. And I don't think many people would contest that, especially after Sven and Golden Glue came in and did what they did to Team Liquid.
Yeah. So just for some dates for you guys, the NALCS first team will be announced during quarterfinals weekend. The semifinals weekend will do coach and rookie of the split, and before finals, the MVP will be announced. So we gave our opinions. Not saying who we're voting for, because we can't put those in until Thursday, and then you'll get those results. I want to do something a little differently this week, since we talked so much about patch 8.16 last week with its eye towards pro. That will be the playoff patch this weekend, but I don't necessarily think we need a full section on the patch again, and I wanted to move straight into Echo Fox versus TSM, since that's the playoff matchup coming up this weekend.
And also since we took an hour talking about...
That has something to do with it, because we need to eventually finish the show.
Do we?
But
have we ever tried just running one dive episode into the next dive episode?
And then it's actually the pregame show for NALCS. We don't go home. We just talk for 72 hours.
All right, Echo Fox versus TSM. That is going to be the Saturday matchup, I do believe. And it should be an interesting one because there is, as you said, like you kind of jokingly mentioned it, but spring 2016, TSM barely slips in. You still, in the back of your mind, it's always there because they made 10 straight finals, right? Yes, they didn't in spring, but is TSM going to return to form? Oh, well, Bjergsen was slamming on Assassins again, right? Like, could they get back? Could they do it? I don't think so, but it's always there.
I think they could do it against Echo Fox.
Yeah.
In this matchup, I think that TSM very well could, upset Echo Fox and make their way further into the playoffs. And then, depending on how this game looks, your tune may change, Azael.
It's true.
As far as this
matchup
best of 5.
Is so volatile.
Yeah.
I have no idea which version of these teams is going to show up.
All I want is more Assassins for Bjergsen the whole damn time. Because they won their tiebreaker that way. He was on LeBlanc. He actually was just killed the enemy carry right at the beginning. They very clearly did it in the Akali game. And there are actually a lot of Assassins to choose from. Now, one thing you briefly mentioned, we already talked about the patch. There are a couple of spot nerfs for Fizz. So
That hurts him as
a little
an
bit of
assassin.
touches to some of the Assassins. I think Wukong as well.
Electrocute being nerfed.
Electrocute's
Hurts
nerfed.
LeBlanc.
A lot of the runes damage is taken down.
Scorch
So that has me like a little bit trepid, but I still want to see Bjergsen on these champions where it's always exciting to watch any game and see one player perform so well that everyone is looking at this player. He's determining the state of the game. Wherever he moves on the map, that is where the play is going to take place because he's the one in control of the power, right? He has the power at his fingertips to win this game. That's what people want to see.
He has the power, but TSM also went 0-3 against Echo Fox, including the tiebreaker.
Yep.
They lost every game. He didn't even pick an assassin in their tiebreaker game. He played Ryze, and he had a decent game, and they lost. I'm trying to actually see if I can pull up the pick van.
That was a weird game.
I was kind of curious about it.
They had like Ryze, Camille, Nocturne.
Yeah, Ryze, Camille,
Ashe.
Nocturne, Ashe, TK.
It was the global team.
And Fizz and Akali were both banned. So they did ban away some assassins from Bjergsen, and he ended up on Ryze. But yeah, it's interesting to me. The way I look at this is I see Echo Fox as a super proactive team. They're not always disciplined. They're going to do some bad stuff, but they're going to keep trying. They're going to keep fighting. And I just feel stylistically that works well against the team that is just kind of passive and sitting back, because I feel like eventually one of those punches lands and that can kind of get you the advantage. I think it's harder to play the game reactively than proactively, because yes, if Grig always answers every single one of Dardoch's ganks and is always there in time, then great. You don't have to make your own aggressive moves and that can work out and you can absorb all the punches. But that being said, even if Dardoch fails a dive, if he's up there 3 more times and they make the next 3 work, well, then Haunter's out of the game or whatever, And I think that that is one of the reasons I think that they have been very successful against TSM throughout this split. And that is the reason that I kind of favor them in this series, is because I see them as one of the most proactive teams. And I think that their bottom lane actually is laning pretty well now. And I think that they're going up against probably the most passive or one
A lot of things that you just said that I want to go deeper on because I really like a lot of the individual matchups here.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Grig versus Dardoch. I feel like that is one of the biggest lopsided matchups as far as jungle that you can have in the North American LCS. Grig has been amazing at landing smites, to get them Baron steals and red buffs and scuttle crabs and everything. But looking at his jungle pathing, he has had a lot of backtracking and wasted time in the early game where that sort of thing is most punished. If you lose a couple of seconds, hesitating going from one lane to the other, hesitating going from one camp and backtracking back through the other way, that results in experience leads that carry over. And I feel like that has been one of the areas where Dardoch has actually shined. Regardless of later into the game, you have those moments you're talking about where he goes for a big play, goes for invades. He tries the 1v2, 1v3 and gets punished. In the early game, he almost always accrues a pretty good, some sort of advantage over the enemy, whether it's scuttle crab control, deeper vision, securing a lane for Huni or something like that. I feel like the jungle matchup is the big Echo Fox favored side of this. However, I also feel like bottom lane matchup, if you target Varus for Lost, this is one of the newest guys in the league, right? And this is a quarterfinal matchup versus TSM, and you talk about all the history and everything that goes along with this team, that can be super intimidating, for a rookie.
I agree with that. As far as bottom lane goes, Spring Split was so weird because we had essentially the same four-way tiebreaker situation, and then we had TSM dominating the tiebreaker day, Clutch failing on the tiebreaker day, and then none of that mattered when the best of 5 happened and TSM just kind of fell apart because they're not the types of players that should be faltering under the pressure of NA playoffs. Like, they're all NA and EULCS split champions, and Demonte's never been in playoffs before. Lost has never been in playoffs before. Grig obviously has also never been in playoffs before. But I also don't think Mike was the reason they lost that spring split playoff series either. Bottom lane should be TSM favored if Sven and Mithy play like the Sven and Mithy that should be playing. And this is why this game is such a coin flip to me. Even looking at some of the solo lane matchups, Hauntzer and Bjergsen have been lane dominant for the last 2.5 weeks. Mm-hmm. They've been really good in lane. But there's 13 other games of the regular season where they weren't. And I don't know which Huni's going to show up. I don't know which Hauntzer is going to show up. And we don't know how Grig, Demonte, and Lost are going to respond to the pressure. Because any of these things can drastically swing the matchup.
Especially because you brought the conversation back to these younger players. Part of the thing when I was looking at Grig and the backtracking or whatever, a lot of that can be, since we don't have access to the full communication, can look like someone saying, "Hey,
like
we
Pokemon.
need to do this." Someone else says, "Hey, the game is going in this direction. We actually need to go bottom side or whatever." So, and that has been one thing that we do know in interviews TSM has talked about, them working on their macro and them playing as a team. So if you kind of fill in the middle area here with a bit of guesswork.
Hey, Grig, come here. Hey, Grig, go there.
It could be one of those issues, and that can be like a systemic issue that in quarterfinals, when the pressure is also adding this extra layer, something like that can break. So I definitely agree. And I also agree about the Huni point, because Huni has been more coin flip than ever.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and I do favor Echo Fox, but not like super heavily. And I still think that despite the fact that Huni has been not very Huni-like this year, he still has been having very good laning phases. It's just that he gets killed by the jungler in the laning phases a lot of time because of his own fault. I'm not saying it's not his own fault, but just the fact of the matter is, when Dardoch is up there and they're 2v2ing, and when Dardoch is up there and he can kind of have that safety to fight, it's not like he doesn't have the skill to lane against Hauntzer, right? Like, he certainly can, and he certainly, I think, can match up 1v1. So it's going to be very interesting. And, you talk about pressure, and I don't think that it's just on the rookies, because even a guy like Dardoch, I said, he's never been to Worlds, right? Like, this is your chance. You want to be able to kind of like go all the way. You want to at least get enough championship points that maybe you could go straight in. Like, there is a ton of pressure on all those guys. And for Huni to even, like, he is such a competitor, right? Like, he wants to prove himself and wants to remain at the top, wants to have that success in North America. So it's definitely a lot of pressure on a lot of these guys. I think Grig feels like he has it worst because I think that the community expectations for TSM are just so incredibly high. And he's the easiest guy to target and blame because he's the only guy on that team that has not had that international like appearance and not had that regional success. So to me, it feels so hard for them when you say that's the most lopsided matchup, and I feel like that's the guy with the most pressure on him. And if he shows up and has that great performance, then TSM fans will rejoice and Grig will be, crowned as the new king. But if he doesn't, it's so hard.
And we talked a little bit about maybe TSM's team play and them trying to decide what to do in the game can have a push and pull effect.
Yeah.
We also, in the tiebreakers, saw an instance where Huni split pushing on Nard in the bottom lane is about to get collapsed on by 4 members of the enemy team. Dardoch is nearby on Kindred. He could leave and Huni dies by himself, but he goes in, he lends the Kindred ultimate, then he dies also.
Solidarity.
It could be, and you can kind of see it where they walk up, then they walk back a little bit, and then they walk in. The hesitation, you feel like, it's like, this is Huni. This is world, finals player.
World
Not
finalist.
World finalist.
Finalist. Like, I can't leave him to die, right? Instead of like, oh, this is clearly, a situation where we can't get him out, and I should at least live.
Cut off the arm, save the body.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not like that's only going to take place on TSM. That's also going to take place on Echo Fox.
Right. So we talked about a lot of things that could happen. Azale says he thinks Echo Fox will win. Kobe, you and I, let's talk about what we think will happen. Our best guess of
All right,
prediction.
go for it.
I'm going to hate myself later for doing this.
TSM jab, baby, let's go.
Yeah, because I feel like so first off, I am sad that these teams are playing each other in the quarterfinals. I think they are two of the most dynamic and exciting teams that we have in our league. So the fact that we are losing one this early in the playoffs disappoints me. With that being said, I feel like TSM has more that could go right and swing it in their favor, even if they are both incredibly volatile teams. And the trends from the past 3 weeks make me think that it has a higher chance of happening. So Bjergsen in particular against DeMonte. We talk about lost small champion pool and Varus. I feel like DeMonte's really only looked good on Syndra. And he's had a couple of these other picks where he throws out a Kali or he throws out Zillion.
Joey.
He saw someone else succeed on it, so he picks it. And he's just not the same level. I think Zoe's okay. Zoe's also nerfed on the next patch pretty substantially. I think about a 4% win rate nerf. So I think Bjergsen should be heavily favored in that matchup. I think Sven and Mithy should win bottom lane. And then Hauntzer's been able to stand up against other top laners in the playoffs. Of course, a lot of this is based off of history and not based off the last 3 months of TSM, who's been a bit of a train wreck. So that's what makes it so volatile. But I think that's what I have to go with. I think I got to go with TSM. Kobe?
I was slightly leaning towards TSM. Again, I think the jungle is going to be a huge difference and a huge determining factor in this matchup. But like you said, for the bottom lane, if you ban out Varus, and Bjergsen, I feel like definitely does have the advantage over DeMonte. Huni hasn't been this reliable Echo Fox thing. So usually you're like, all right, well, this team has, 2 or 3 points over here. Then, maybe there's 2 or 3 points of strength on this side.
Got to take into consideration team styles. It's not just
Yeah.
it's not just 1v1s,
And
right?
the
It's
3-0
about
throughout the split.
3-0 throughout the split, and the fact that Echo Fox is so much more proactive. To me, it's more about the styles that the teams play than like you put Bjergsen and DeMonte in a sandbox and who wins. You put
Nobody's saying that this is a sandbox
yeah,
fight.
yeah. Because Bjergsen can build the bigger castle.
But I really, it's also interesting too, because now I'm thinking more about the changes in the patch, and some of the assassins have been taken down. Some of the damage is toned down as well. And it becomes a little bit more interesting. I think I still am going to be slightly TSM favored.
Dark side.
All right, you got a couple 3-2s for TSM.
So I think if they win, they probably win convincingly. This is why it's a
That's the
volatile
funniest
series.
predictions.
Yeah. Well, it's like if they win, it goes this way, right?
Yeah,
Because if Haunzer, Bjergsen, and the bottom lane are able to be lane dominant, that's not a close series.
Even with Champion Select changing so drastically, blue side being favored very heavily in the North American
Echo Fox
LCS,
picked red side multiple times in the past 2 weeks. So there's a chance TSM's blue side every single game if Echo Fox keeps that same strategy. Not to say that they're not getting advantages of that strategy because they're getting counter picks. And if TSM has no idea how to team player macro, Echo Fox could smash them, right? This is probably a very unsatisfying prediction to listen to because I do feel like anything could happen. But if it's going to happen the way that I think, it would be like TSM 3-1.
Okay.
I just feel like maybe it's wishful thinking, but the fire has been rekindled inside of Bjergsen. That Akali game, not just that one, but then he followed it up with a LeBlanc game in the tiebreakers as well.
I believe he's got the fire. I just don't know if the rest of the team around him. We'll see. I think they all want to win. I think it's gonna be really close.
I am very usually centered on junglers though, and
Then you should be going Echo Fox.
I do think that Dardoch's gonna do some positive things, but it's hard for a jungler if Jad, the thing you're talking about here with winning lanes takes place, then it's kind of a trap, right? And Dardoch's going to be put in that position where he feels like, you know, he needs to go for X big play or he needs to go for X, jungle invade, and TSM collapses. And if TSM continue to pick these picks, Tahm Kench, Ryze, all these things with, global mobility, and
that did not work for TSM.
It
I don't
worked
want
in
them
the
to do
second
that.
one. You did not watch the second tiebreaker? They picked almost the same thing.
They had LeBlanc.
They had
I guess
Ryze. They also had Ryze.
What was their jungler?
They had
there? It
Ryze
was
and Tahm Kench.
Trundle instead of Nocturne. Anyway, you
Yeah.
don't need 5 globals. Like 2 or 3 is
exactly. You don't need
Yeah.
all of them.
Yeah, okay.
But they still did have a couple of the pieces, and they were able to collapse quickly. So I can see a world where Dardoch again feels that pressure, like I gotta do something. I gotta carry this stuff. Someone died early, and they get collapsed on, and then in the best of 5.
Zale's just like watching us go back and forth and like circle all these predictions. He's like, just make up your mind, give us a spicy take, and
we gave it. All right, slightly for TSM. So there
Slightly
we go.
for TSM. All
This
right.
one is gonna be, I think, the more exciting of the 2 quarterfinals and the closer.
Yep.
Oh,
So
man.
the Sunday matchup, 100 Thieves versus FlyQuest. So we got 2 TSMs and 1 Echo Fox. We'll see how the cookie crumbles. But 100 Thieves versus FlyQuest. I always feel bad saying it because I feel like I've been kind of. I don't think FlyQuest is as good as their record is, just like how I think Cloud9 is better than their
You were
record is.
singing their praises just a week ago. I could see it in your eyes, though. You were ready to, as soon as they slip up.
So I still
Come back down their
I
throat.
think that they have done well with the roster that they have. I think that they have overperformed. I think that they have landed on the high end of the spectrum. I think they deserve credit for that. They have improved a lot. I think the fact that they made the playoffs with this roster is impressive. Even I put them higher than you guys, but I put them 8th, right? And I thought their upside was the high upside was like a 7th or a 6th, and they hit that. And I think they should be very happy with that. That means I think all these guys performed at a very high level for their talent level, right? That being said, let's be realistic. A lot of their wins, they barely squeaked out. A lot of their wins were these crazy kind of base race styles, right? They did not have a bunch of dominant wins still. And I think despite the fact that they were 1 game away from getting a bye, they lost dominantly to Cloud9, and then they lost all their tiebreaker matches, which pushed them in 6th. And I think that's where they deserve to be in this field of teams.
Yeah. Part of the thing that makes me feel in a similar kind of way is, a lot of the games during the summer split, there were times where, they ran back for a small window of time where the base race would work out, or they, rushed down the Nexus or something like that. JJ has gotten very good at, the macro for the team and playing Tahm Kench and all these sorts of improvements that they have been outspoken about. And St. Vicious has done, I think, a very good job at focusing these guys on their goal in the game. And then maybe it's JJ, maybe it's not, as far as, the team communication, who keeps the focus up in the game. However, again, in the tiebreakers, just this last weekend, we had a game where Turtle solo kills Cody Sun 3 times in the bottom lane by himself. They take the early turret. FlyQuest is just so much early power. They have a Rumble with full magic penetration ready for these team fights. They had Fizz for Keen, and then a couple of these kills start going through. Keen actually gave over 2 times a couple of unnecessary kills.
Keen's Fizz looked bad.
To the Zoe. And then it ended up that Ryu on Zoe was actually, you bought them time, literally just bubbling people, picking up kills in the jungle, because he got this early money from Keen. And that game being a preview to this matchup, I feel like is the worst evidence against FlyQuest and is the worst way for them to head into this matchup. Having that in your recent memory is so difficult, because it looked like they had the biggest perfect early lead. They have a good early comp to work with. But 100 Thieves, as soon as they started making these comeback plays, they're like, oh, well, they're just going to win late like they always do.
Yeah, and I get the feeling that FlyQuest has peaked maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Oh, you got to make the counter argument.
And I don't-
We are 3 members now going the same way.
That's what happens when you lose a bunch of games down the stretch in tiebreakers. I mean, even looking at the ways they have won this split, they hopped on Varus Braum before everyone else. They won like 3 games that way. There were 4 games in a row this split where they got Rumble top, Trundle jungle, and Tom Kent support. They have been good at finding the way they can generate victories, but I don't think this team has the depth that you need in a best of 5.
Yeah.
And that's where I think 100 Thieves is going to be able to beat them, because 100 Thieves, in their own way, has scrambled to try and find wins. They were like, we need to funnel because Cody's going to play Xayah mid. We need to throw Meteor spot lane. We need new jungler. We need Ondo. We're going to trade for him. He's going to do this stuff. But they scramble in these unique ways to find wins. And like we saw in the tiebreaker, they still have that amazing mid and late game.
All right, I'll do the counter argument then.
All right.
FlyQuest. They already showed that they can blast on 100 Thieves in the early game easily.
For free.
Easily.
Didn't even have to try.
Santorin can play any jungler, any of the early game junglers. Lee Sin is back in the meta, and he's been pretty good on the Lee Sin. I was going to say super good, but then I started remembering a couple of the plays, and we're going to tone it back down.
Ish.
Still in the green, though.
Yeah.
Just remember, like almost all of his wins this season have basically been Trundle or Sejuani.
I mean, that's been a lot of the junglers, though.
Yeah.
I mean, you're just kind of stating the jungler meta right now.
Well, no, but he has
made
3 Kindred
ones, right?
games.
Yeah.
0-3.
Yeah.
2 Xin Zhao games. 0-2. He's lost on Camille. Lost on Lee Sin. He did win on Kha'Zix. That is his only win on what I would consider a carry jungler the whole year.
And I feel like that came back to kind of the formula that they determined.
Yeah.
If you have a Rumble top and everybody's damaged, Kindred.
No, I'm not saying it's wrong.
Kindred is a bad pick.
I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying as far as being the difference maker in the early game to like hard carry, slam that game and take over, he doesn't play those
No,
champions.
he doesn't have to.
Okay.
Yeah. I also argue
Turtle.
Sejuani
Let's
can
bring
do
it back to
that.
Turtle solo killing Cody Sun 3 times in lane.
Did you
because
see the early game?
that looked bad? Cody Sun was making some plays. He would arcane shift forward
He
to
was
try and
trolling.
stop.
He was half asleep
to try
that
and.
game.
He was asleep.
He must have been. He's like, it's Monday. When does Scrim start, guys? Like, this is my solo queue game. Oh, what? This is a tiebreaker? I'm going to wake up and start winning on Ezreal. That's what it
Yeah,
felt
that was a
like.
truly bad game.
Okay, I conclude my argument.
All right,
then.
good job.
With
Other
that
side.
summary there, that was
Yeah.
well done.
Yeah. In summary, it's I mean, it's. I feel like they have to snowball early, right? If you win early. I'm total agreement with that. I think you have to get Flame on a champion where he can do well in lane. You have to have Turtle and JJ laning well. You have to have Santorin making moves in the early game, because I think clearly 100 Thieves has a superior late game. I think that that is where they're the most buttoned up. I think that the way you beat 100 Thieves is very often just beating them early and snowballing the game, not allowing them to get that chance where they're doing these organized team fights and Cody Sun is able to be protected. That is the way you win as FlyQuest. But I still see it being a pretty dominant series. I think it's 3-0 or 3-1 for 100 Thieves.
Yeah, I'd agree. FlyQuest is
questions?
not that great early. Twitter questions, man. You have the first one up, or do you want me to read it?
Go ahead.
Phone out. All right, cool. This one is from David Yoshimoto. He says, looking back at the full year, summer and spring, what was the best and worst move/signing, including coaches?
I think
in
that
retrospect, too
well,
big.
No, in retrospect, I think that one's super easy.
Okay.
Is the TSM getting rid of Double Lift and Biofrost and bringing in Sven and Mithy?
Does that make the best signing then Team Liquids?
Yes,
Yeah.
because they won
I mean,
the split.
it's also
on
the
back of Double Lift.
most expensive signings.
Yeah.
If you put them all together. But I think that one clearly to me was the worst change, right?
Yeah, I think that
Yeah.
one was the worst.
So even at the time, so like hindsight is obviously 2020, and I remember we said this when TSM did the Double Lift Biofrost for Zen and Mithy. I believe at the time I said there's a high chance this actually makes TSM worse because Double Lift and Biofrost were so good, but they almost felt obligated to do it as an org because of this back-to-back Worlds group stage failures after NA dominance. They thought like, well, something has to change. It just turns out maybe they identified the wrong things.
And I also said, adding on to that in addition to changes for TSM and it affecting their team, they're making one of their competitors stronger.
And that's the biggest problem.
Turns out they did, and their competitor that they made stronger placed first both splits. So
Yeah, that
that's
was
the end
big
of
one.
that story.
I'm trying to think of any of some other ones. So I agree with you. I think that's the biggest one. But I think Reignover turned out to be a huge flop. That was the beginning of this year for CLG. Talking to some of those guys on CLG, and the buzz around that was that this was their big move. This is the move that pulls it all together. They now have that great jungler. We're going straight to the top. And they missed playoffs.
They'd wanted him for
Dad
years.
said they were going to be the first
CLG
place.
had wanted Reignover for
I remember
years.
those
Yeah,
times.
they were good times. Good times.
Oh,
Yeah.
that was great. I love those times. Amazing.
Yeah, I mean they were in the running for him when he got on Immortals and all this
Yeah.
stuff. They wanted him for a long time. They got him. Their team has flopped very hard. The other thing that I would say, and it's not as flashy, some of the best signings have been the C9 Academy signings. The fact that they put so much effort into getting these really good players, Blabber, Zazel, guys like that, Licorice coming in spring, like all these young players that C9 has picked up. They have some of the most promising young North American players in the whole league, all on one squad.
You know what's crazy about that? In the spring split, they had Wiggly as their jungler.
Also, yeah.
And Wiggly is just debuted on CLG and been good. And in the offseason, they're like, well, we can't really hold on to Svenskar and Wiggly and this new Blabber guy. So I guess we're going to pick Blabber and give Wiggly to CLG.
They also gave away Smoothie. Like, just look at the talent that Cloud9 has
Yeah.
given away.
This is
And
insane.
we're still saying they have the best 7-man roster.
Yeah.
Probably, like, packed full of talent as far as both
Good
the
job.
academy
We never
team.
doubted you.
Yeah.
Good job, C9 GM, like player evaluator.
We got the next one, though.
Yeah, Twice Eye Slasher with over 140 champions and a large range of characters.
I was
types-
so excited to read this one, Jack. Last time you were like, Kobe,
Kobe,
wanna
read it.
And I was like,
Read
Kobe,
it.
now's your chance.
do it. Well, you already did it.
You don't even have it up on your
I
phone.
don't want to.
You're too slow.
It's what do you mean? It's right here.
Okay, read it.
I don't want the leftovers of your Twitter question. Finish your job.
What unfilled champion niches would you like to see tackled next? Azale gets to answer this first, as in champs that fundamentally play differently than others, like Pyke, Ivern, or Asol.
I mean, it's funny because I just love dot classes in every game. I want a true pet class or a true like damage over time type thing. Like give me some stuff to like micro.
Malzahar too.
You can't say two. I was gonna say a hunter type with a pet. You say your warlock type.
Yeah,
with
but
the
Warlock
dot.
have pets too.
Yeah, but the dots. Focus on the
Okay,
dots.
well the dots are fun, but I think they're not fun for other players. So I don't know if we would get one, but that or I really like in Dota some of the kind of more like pet focused champions. I'm totally spacing out on what is the bear hero.
It's
I totally am spacing out on the name.
Misha is the bear.
Yeah, Misha is the bear, but I can't remember the actual name, which is terrible because I played that so much.
Is it literally Beastmaster or something like that?
No, Beastmaster is the guy with double axis. Anyway, it doesn't matter. They're like more of one where it's like you're actually controlling
Lone
Wolf,
Lone Hunter,
Lone Druid.
Druid.
I can't remember.
I think it's maybe like
Maybe
Lone Druid or something.
But one where you control like two separate entities. That's what I was hoping Kindred was going to be when I hear about Lamb and Wolf. But Wolf is just kind of like a circle on the ground. It's not as exciting.
Right.
I mean, Wolf is a little skull head and then is a circle on the ground.
I
When
know.
you put him as a circle on the
Yeah.
ground, like he's literally in a, yeah.
But it's just
Anyways,
one-
we won't
it's
get
one
in,
dude.
We
It's
won't
one dude,
exactly.
though.
We won't get into that one.
Yeah.
But I agree with you, Azale. I was gonna say like a hunter type where your pet is a lot of the power because it was always super interesting. There are
Is Lone
multiple
Druid.
ways to build the lone druid. Some people would build like the Hand of Midas or whatever, and put Radiant on their bear, and like the bear is the thing that's super scary, and the druid's just like buffing him up and like
Running
Do you
around.
not
running around back
consider
here, or he can be the
champions
DPS.
like Ori or Azir as some type of like minion or
No.
pet type character? Because you're
The
some
ball? You gotta be kidding me! The ball is your pet that you're directing.
But you can't
It's-
attack
it's a
the
set
ball. You cannot
entity.
like.
yeah,
and you can't attack Azir soldiers. You want like targetable Azir
Yeah,
soldiers.
and control two things at once. You know what I mean? So it's like
I mean,
if I
I-
can move the ball at the same time as I can move Oriana, like you know what I mean? As far as like,
Yeah.
there's different buttons for the ball. There's different like,
Well, you can move the ball at the same time as Orion.
but I mean like two separate things. Like give me buttons for
As
the ball.
I
give
was
me the abilities on
saying
the ball.
with my pet
ahead.
idea, I want to put items on the pet too. Like it wants to be more than
Give the ball an IE.
Right.
Because Shaco Clone would be like,
You have to split your
you
gold
get it
up
for a
between the
second,
two.
right? But I want permanent. It would be like a permanent thing, and they'd have whatever
Yeah, so
interaction.
I
with
can be
each other.
taxing the cannons while I'm also farming the jungler.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I don't have a good answer for this. I want more simple champions, actually. I get a little sad every time one of my simple, easy champions gets reworked into something complicated. I think we've gone a little too far in the complex mode. I want
Give
my
me some
old-
more Garens.
I want my point and click Tarek
You
Stone
want One
Shatter
Punch
back.
Man in League?
Yeah. Well, I don't want to like one shot you, but I like playing the game tactically, and
Bring back old GP.
yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, old GP is.
What do you mean
basically-
you don't have a good answer for it? The simplest of champions. Just say some simple stuff like he
No,
can
it's-
only what?
That's good.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
That was a good answer.
Okay.
I don't think.
Well, I
your
mean,
pet
he
champ
said
is
it wasn't
going to be
a.
Well, only because the league team is legitimately just taken those champions and gotten rid of a lot of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, like Nunu is probably
Yeah.
more complex now.
And I'm
but-
like kind of nostalgic about the simpleness of it all.
AP Sion
right.
from back in the day.
Maybe
get your
right?
Bobby boots, run down bot lane.
Yeah.
Shoot your little eye lasers
We have a lot
at
of
him
other
and
champions
blow
that
up your
essentially
shield.
play the same way. They're just harder to execute. Like if we didn't like the play style of the like shove mid, go roam bot, like why do I have to do that on Aurelion Sol? Why can't I do it on Sion? Like we're just
How about
making the
this,
button
Jad? We
so
make
hard.
you a character with 5 passives and 1 ability.
And I don't want complicated passives.
You have 1
I want
ability.
the abilities to each.
You get
Passive
1 ability that
you
you
run
have to
faster.
click.
Passive
Yeah.
2, you take less damage. Passive 3, you deal more damage.
Okay,
and your
final
ultimate
question.
is they all get amplified.
And none of them are on 3 hit triggers. They all just
they
work.
just are there.
Oh, okay. The final question actually has a super quick answer that we talked about at the start of the episode. David at Light Blue Gangsta says, I seem to remember you talking on the dive that 99 teams usually makes playoffs. Is this the first time in NAL's history that a 99 team hasn't made playoffs? It technically is not. Team 8 finished the regular season 9-9, but it is the first time a 9-9 team did not get to play a tiebreaker to get into playoffs. So
There you go.
thanks for the question.
Good answer.
Yeah. All right, that's going to do it for this episode of The Dive. We are moving into best of 5 territory now as playoffs start this weekend. Echo Fox versus TSM is the first one, and 100 Thieves versus FlyQuest is on Sunday. So join us as we find out which teams will be going to Oakland, because that'll be the top 4 after that. And then
That
we'll
will.
start there.